Hello, assalamu alaikum. We are going to get started. Thank you everyone for coming today. Today's session is entitled Muslims in Public Schools, Student Rights, Curriculum, and Parental Support. This description of the panel, which I'll read just in case if you haven't had the chance to. Studies indicate at least 50% of Muslim youth experience bias-based school bullying. Classrooms often omit or minimize Islam from curriculum and limit exposure to literature that enhances American Muslim identity. Advocacy and awareness can promote professional development and parental empowerment. This session will address solutions and frequently asked questions. So before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping. Thank you again for coming. I would ask that if you have your cell phones on, cell phones, to please put them on vibrate or turn them off just as a courtesy to our speakers. If you need to exit the room and talk or go to the restroom or whatever, please do so quietly. There are several handouts on your chairs. One is this purple pamphlet. It's a Know Your Rights pamphlet, courtesy of CARE California. If you don't have one, it's okay because we have extras in the front and you can come and get them at the end. The second thing should be an index card. I will circulate these. Sana is a volunteer and she's helping me. Sana, if you can wave so everybody knows who you are. So if you need index cards or pens, just let Sana know or tap me and then I will be happy to do that. So the way how we want to run questions and answers is just to kind of be efficient is write down your question here and then I'll collect them and then give them to the appropriate panelists. There are also evaluation forms, the hot pink form. There's also purple ones that Sana has. You can either fill these out manually or there's an ISNA app I was told that you can find from the ISNA website, which is isna.net. And last but not least, there's several handouts. There should be 3 handouts, additional ones from the panelists. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to introduce the speakers. We have Maha El-Ghanaidy. She is the Chief Executive Officer and also the founder and chair of the Board of Trustees of ING, otherwise known as the Islamic Network Group. She is the author of training handbooks on outreach for American Muslims, as well as training seminars for public institutions on developing cultural competency within the American Muslim community. She is a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum and recently named by the San Jose Business Journal as one of Silicon Valley's Women of Influence. Maha has been recognized with numerous civil rights awards, including the Civil Rights Leadership Award from the California Association of Human Relations Organizations and the Citizen of the Year Award from the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors. She earned her master's degree in religious studies from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree in political science and economics from the American University in Cairo. Dr. Seema Imam is faculty at National Louis University right here in Illinois, in Lisle, where she serves in elementary, middle-level teacher education since 1996. She is the former chair of the Faculty Senate and former co-chair of the University Leadership Council. Dr. Imam holds 2 doctorates, one in curriculum and social inquiry and one in Islamic education. She is the former founding principal of Universal School right here in Illinois in Bridgeview. She has 16 years as a public school teacher in Chicago Public Schools. Seema holds certifications in special education, elementary education, reading specialist, school principal, and school superintendent. Dr. Imam is the author of a chapter in Muslim Voices in Schools and co-author of a children's book, I Am Listening, a story in public school where the teacher wears hijab and values correct pronunciation of names. She serves on the board of the Islamic School League of America. Most recently, Seema's co-authored a paper entitled Muslim Students in American Public Schools Rising to the Challenge, which was accepted to the American Education Research Association's annual meeting coming up in April 2015. Excuse me, it's past now. Next is Zahra Billoo Esquire. She is the Executive Director of CARE San Francisco Bay Area. Ms. Billoo strives to promote justice and mutual understanding. She's been with CARE San Francisco since 2009, and she immediately embraced her roles as a community organizer and civil rights advocate. She frequently provides trainings at mosques and universities as part of CARE's efforts to empower the community. While building bridges with allies on civil rights issues, Zahra also represents victims of discrimination and advocates for policy changes that uphold civil rights for all. For those of you just arriving, feel free to come up in the front as well. There's plenty of chairs. Last but not least, Dr. Sadia Warsi. She is a tenured associate professor. She joined the special education program at National Louis University in 2003. She teaches an array of graduate classes in the special education program. Dr. Warsi has extensive experience in working with pre-service and in-service teachers in urban educational settings. Her current research interests include the role of children's literature in self-contained and exclusive special education classrooms in urban settings, and also with parents and children who are residing in homeless shelters, and families and children with disabilities in the United States. Her experiences and influences as a student in India, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Canada, along with her work with immigrant families of students with disabilities and with children in homeless shelters, inform her teaching, service, and research at National Louis University. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. First up is Zahra.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. There's no pressure being a panel right after lunch when everyone's feeling a little bit tired and we're talking about a heavy subject. So thank you all for being in here. And again, for people that are still coming in, feel free to find your way to the front. So when I think of school bullying, I think of how for about a decade, people asked me what it was like to wear a hijab in public school, and whether or not it was hard and how I dealt with it. And for a decade, I said it was really easy. It wasn't a really big issue. People asked me some questions, but they were mostly friendly. What I blocked out as a coping mechanism myself was the fact that when I was 10, just about a year into my first year wearing hijab, I had it pulled off in the middle of a classroom. And yet, for years, I told people it was really easy to wear a hijab in public school. I went to school with those very people who pulled off my hijab for the next several years. As we finished middle school and went on to high school, I learned at 10 what a hate crime was. I had to learn how to advocate for myself, but also how to come home and have conversations with my parents about what had happened, why I was upset, and trying to figure out how we would work together to make me feel safe at school so that I could learn and grow. And alhamdulillah, I am really grateful to have had a support system that circled around me and said, we're here for you. We want to make sure that you feel safe at school. We want to give you platforms to answer questions about Islam and Muslims. And the other thing that happened in my own coping was that I became really outspoken, and I learned to speak about my religion, knowing that for the next few years, even despite this incident, I was the only visible Muslim in my public school. I was in fact the only visible Muslim in my public school right until I got to my first year of college. Now, we talk about how men and women have different experiences, and for sure, my brother was also a visible Muslim, but very differently visible because he wasn't walking around with his religion wrapped around his head. But still, he fasted, he prayed, and he had those experiences also. So I come to this work from that personal context. Now, for those that are not familiar with CARE, we're the nation's largest American Muslim civil rights organization. We are, in fact, the only Muslim organization on the ground in numerous states that are providing direct legal services to people that are facing discrimination because of their Muslim faith or their misperceived Muslim faith. I don't say that to brag about CARE or even to make this a CARE session, but rather to illustrate why this next piece is a problem. Of the thousands of complaints that we receive every year, less than 5% involve school bullying or school harassment. And when this is happening, in comparison or in contrast to my own personal experience, but also knowing that the Sikh community has spoken very vocally about their own experiences with bullying, about how their children are having trouble at school. And when in the LGBT community, kids are committing suicide because the bullying is so severe, I don't think that our kids have it any easier. I'm worried about a disconnect, that the numbers aren't coming in, that students aren't talking about it, or if they're like me, they're blocking it out and thinking that this was easy. So what we decided at Cure California was to figure out how to get this data. We knew that the kids weren't coming to us, and what we were hearing from parents was that they were worried about their kids, but they weren't necessarily coming to their parents either. And so in 2010, we embarked on an effort to highlight school bullying, to go into the community and say, how do we get this information directly from the students? And we did it in a few different ways. The first was talking to parents about what the signs were of bullying, but also what their rights are when bullying happens. We surveyed students directly, so we went to youth groups, we went to Sadia, and we understand that that's not a perfectly scientific way of doing it because there are lots of kids that are not participating in those organizations or places. But we said where they are and where we can find these students, let's talk to them directly. And not only did we collect quantitative data about what they were saying they were experiencing, so how many kids in this room of 10 kids has experienced bullying, but also qualitative data, looking at what are the stories. And the first thing that was most surprising to me, and I think that will also be a theme throughout some of the conversation this afternoon, is that in addition to experiencing bullying from their peers, students at times felt unsafe in their classrooms because of their teachers' words and actions. Some of the most problematic stories from the Bay Area, which many people who are not from the Bay Area are surprised by because we think of the Bay Area as this really progressive bubble where everyone's happy and no one harasses anyone. We had a student, a Muslim girl, who wears a hijab, and the teacher said to her, "You don't be quiet, I will rip that thing off your head." We had another student in the Bay Area whose name was Jihad, and the teacher said to him in front of his entire classroom, both of these incidents, by the way, in front of the entire classroom. The teacher said to the class, "Students, do you know that this child's name means holy struggle? Doesn't it look like he's about to engage in a holy struggle against his classroom?" And it was like, here you have a young kid, pre-middle school, who's being ostracized for his Muslim name. What did the numbers themselves say, stories aside? This survey that we came around to conducting, we did in 2012. About 500 students were surveyed. Nearly 50% of them, between the ages of 11 and 18, had experienced some form of bullying. The report found that approximately 1 in 5 young women reported being bullied because of their headscarves. 1 in 5 youth reported that they were unsure of participating in classroom discussions in which Islam and Muslims were discussed, and were unsure of whether or not their teachers respected them. And more than 1/3 of bullying victims surveyed indicated that reporting harassment incidents to school administrators and or their parents was not helpful. And so where does this gap come from? Sometimes it's because kids don't feel safe talking to their families or their administrators. With administrators, they worry that they're going to get into more trouble with the bully because they've narked on or ratted on the kids that were bullying them, or that nothing will change. With parents, to be very honest, sometimes the concern was, my mom's going to come to school and embarrass me and make it worse. And if everyone sees my mom dressed funny or looking differently, then that might make it worse. Or if my mom shows up and doesn't know what she's asking for, then I'm going to get into more trouble. And this isn't to say that moms shouldn't be doing this, but rather to reflect back what many students are experiencing. So, in quickly wrapping up, and I hope that we can talk a lot more about this during the Q&A, what are the rights of students and families when these things are happening? First, it's important to know that schools are required to have anti-bullying policies. And if parents are going to the schools and saying, what is your anti-bullying policy? I want to see it so that I can hold you accountable when you're not abiding by it. Schools are required to provide that. When students report bullying to teachers or other school officials, those people are required to take action to stop the bullying. Now, as a side note, sometimes as a lawyer, I'll hear from people who want X, Y, and Z from the school, or from the employer, or from the government, whenever something is happening and their rights are being violated. The difficult part here is understanding that we're not always going to get everything we want, but it's the engagement in the process that the school is responsible for. So if you say that my child is being bullied, and this kid is harassing him, and I want the classroom changed, and I want to know what happens to the kid, and I want the kid arrested, right? Like all of these things, which sometimes parents will ask for, and sometimes that anger is very much appropriate and necessary. We're not always going to get all of it. It doesn't mean that the school's not cooperating. It just means we've got to engage in this process and advocate for what makes sense. Students have the right to wear a hijab or kufi or any other religious attire to school. They shouldn't be knock down points in their physical education classes or anywhere else in a public school setting if they want to wear their religious attire. If a student does not wish to participate in school activities that would require the removal of any religious clothing and or that they feel might violate their religious beliefs, so sometimes singing in the Christmas event, right? I remember getting opted out of that often. Schools can't penalize students for doing that. Students have a right to do that. A little less related to bullying and teacher harassment, but something that's close to my heart as someone who always took the day off for Eid and enjoyed celebrating Eid with my family. Students have the right to take time off for religious holidays, and should. Of course, the best practice here is to make that request early on, to be as informative with the school as possible, right? Just not showing up on Eid day is not going to count as an excused absence, but actually asking. And sometimes we'll hear from families who will say, but my student was told that he or she would be penalized or couldn't make up the test. And that's actually where the school is violating the law, and there is some room to get remedy there. Students are allowed to pray individually or as a group during the school day. Students should choose a time to pray that does not coincide with school activities or class time. So getting space set aside in the library to pray during lunch break, or getting excused to attend Friday prayers is something that students have the right to do and really should follow up on. Lastly, what we say to people is that if you're unsure about what's happening, a best practice is to get comfortable talking to your kids about what's going on, about what they're experiencing. There's regular engagement when there are, not problems, is what enables them to communicate with you when there are. And if you're unsure if rights are being violated or if remedies are available, report it. Talk to the school, talk to the administrators, reach out to a local care office or any other advocacy group in your area that is working with young people. The worst case scenario in these situations, because you're seeking confidential legal advice, is that they will tell you that you don't have a remedy, that there is nothing that can be done and that the school is in the right. But more often than not, what we're finding is that the problem is not that there is no remedy, but that there is underreporting and people are unwilling to rock the boat a little to make kids feel safe in school. Jazakallah khair.
For those of you that don't have seats, there are a few seats in the front.
Can everybody raise their hand if you have an empty seat by you, just raise it. Don't be shy. Thank you. So there are 2 seats up here. I can move to the stage. It's never coming. There's 2 seats up here.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for coming. We have a microphone here where we need to hold the button, so if it looks like I'm standing awkward, I gotta hold this button and forward up my slides. So welcome to this presentation relating Muslim students in public schools. Parents as advocates for inclusion, and I only have a few minutes. So I want to talk about a couple of important directions. I want us to think about, as we go forward, that this is a challenge. And we want to think about increasing understanding of Islam and Muslims, and we want to think about enhancing the teaching strategies for religious diversity. So that's what we want to think about ourselves as parents and our schools. And when we do that, we would say, what roles do parents play? And you have unbelievable, immense power as parents in the public school setting. You have immense power, but I rarely see, and I'll give a couple of examples, how we really actually use that power. So informed parents have this tremendous power to influence schools, classrooms, and teachers. And parents can influence even curriculum, and directly impact what is taught and what is not taught. And sometimes we have things that are taught explicitly, and then we have lessons that happen implicitly. So they weren't really teaching that, but that was a lesson or a message that went across. An example would be kids in public school that there's no mention ever of their holiday. They just fasted, and Ramadan's coming back to June and May, and we're going to have every month in a little while in school days. So when we think about that, we really have to think about what that means. If your child goes to school and their holiday is never mentioned, and they don't hear happy holiday, then they get a real message that that's not important. So the second one then, or the third one then, is that parents can share opinions on events and occurrences, how they were handled, what happened. It doesn't have to be that your child was included in the problem, but that you know of an event that happened and you want to know how was that handled. You can influence and take that on. And the more the principal and curriculum coordinators and administrators find out and teachers realize that parents are watching and concerned and have a voice, then the more you're going to see things done in more appropriate ways. So that's, one of the goals. Now, informed parents having this power means you have to be observant and you have to give feedback. And when it comes to, things like swimming attire, dances, holiday programs, which were already mentioned, you need to speak up and let the school know. You need to offer to participate. And I know many of you probably already do it. I did. I participated a lot. You can be the hijabi room mom or the visible Muslim. And just by your very presence, students will come to know you as someone that they like, enjoy seeing, you're a pleasure, you're sweet to them, you don't have to be teaching anything, but your presence will give them something that there's no other place that they can get it in that school unless there's a hijabi wearing or a visible Muslim teacher. And I'm not saying it's only true for the mothers. It can also be, good places for fathers. So you need to then share with your administration things around importance of the lunch menu and make suggestions. All this has an impact. When it comes to curriculum that directly impacts learning, too often, we have to be proactive about social studies, about world history. We need to offer resources. If it's not ourselves, it's websites. We are going to have some for you in the last couple of speakers. We need to speak with our own children about their role in sharing with you, the parent, what's happening in their school and classroom. And that way, as you think about all these things, sharing about cultures and countries, about ancestry. I teach teachers who go into public schools. I've done it for the last 20 years, and I always tell the teachers that are about to go into a classroom in a public school to be caring, to be nurturing, to put a map up, and every time a child mentions my grandmother went to such and such, put a dot on that place. So you want to ask teachers to recognize and validate. It's very fair for you to say validate what's happening. Well, we come to this problem of world events. World events will hit the classroom and everything just, happens. So last April there was a high school in Chicago and children were given a handout with 6 terrorist groups on it. They all had Islamic roots, but there were 6 columns. The students were all over in the classroom were to figure out where their ideology was, who founded them, where they're rooted, in what geographic location. Now, students, these public school freshmen in high school, Muslims and others, rank them. Who's the most dangerous now that you've done your research? And then write an essay about why someone might join that group. So I got wind of it as a professor in the same community, called the school. Principal passed it to the social studies department. Social studies department defended it and dismissed it because why? No parents complained. So there you have the last bullet. Why didn't parents know, or did they know? And are we intimidated not to speak up? We can't be. We all have to take all this on together. So, sharing these ideas and opinions and what happens and how it's handled is really, really important. Your kids should not become the expert on Islam and world and political things that they don't know any more about than the other child in the seat next to them. They really don't. So students often get this pressure. And, Muslim children, we mentioned bullying. We mentioned often, the teachers sometimes they don't notice things. They don't think about them in the way that other people think about them. So something happens and they don't take it as really important, as causing a problem for a particular child. So that's what we have to do, is communicate with our school teachers. Last couple of things here. There was a hostile environment created by by 5 graffiti things, and I'm going to speed past it, and I'm going to only give you like a second to see the slide because it's not good for the kids, you know? And that was scrawled in a bathroom. Nothing was going to be done about it until a few parents and CARE started, you know, I was in the Chicago area, to point out something has to be done about this scrawling of this, you know, actually death threats to Muslims in a high school. So important that we communicate. You know, that's what I said. We need to increase understanding, and we also need to, you know, be the advocate. So we build relationships. Relationships are really important. Schools, I'm not going to show it, and I back it up. Sorry. You know, lots of research. One of the other researchers besides myself is in the audience. We have a number of, you know, things that we can share. We just don't have time. But some of them include, you know, seeing things like Muhammadan, you know, that he, you know, invented the religion. Things like times when kids left the room, went to the bathroom 2 or 3 times during a class because they couldn't stand the conversation about the period of history that's being talked about. So what's the strategy then to break down those barriers? You know, provide opportunities, invite teachers to things in your mosque, share your family tradition, share your culture, talk about your hijab like it doesn't bother you at all, because I know it doesn't, mine doesn't bother me. But they don't know that. They don't understand why you wear it, how you feel in it. So we started with 2 points, increasing understanding and enhancing the teaching strategies for religious diversity. And that's what we talked about today. We do have handouts. I have a handout out there among you because we are collecting data. If anybody wants to participate, has an email, and please email me if you would like to be a participant in the survey and or in focus groups so that we can tell, you know, all the stories. The good stories you tell would help us help teachers know what works. And I'm going to turn the mic over. And
Thank you.
There's a fire hazard situation going on by the doors, so I'm going to turn you to. So I'm going to ask whoever's standing there with strollers or whatnot, if you guys can please clear the way because I don't think that's safe. There are chairs here. Again, can I ask people to raise their hands if they have an empty chair by them? And I'm going to ask that everybody standing at the door find a seat, please. As soon as possible. And there's 2 chairs up here, there's 1 chair here. Strollers can be parked up here. So I just want to make sure that we have, you know, a way to get in and out. And then if somebody else can open up that other door, I'm going to start giving out tickets too. No, I'm kidding, I don't have any authority to do that. So for those of you who just got here without, you know, I'm going to have Dr. Warsi start speaking, but we do have index cards and pens. I'm going to start walking around and passing them out. So you guys can write down your questions, anything burning questions, and then raise your hand and I'll circle back and collect them, okay? Here's Dr. Warsi.
Can you hear me? All right, Assalamu alaikum. Okay. How many parents here? Raise a hand. How many teachers? Who? How many students? How many people who like children? That was a trick question. The reason I asked how, you know, just for the show of hands, I'm actually pretty surprised that there's a lot of students here. And I'm a special education professor, and before that I was a special ed teacher. And I've always felt that you cannot leave how people treat you up to other people. You have to empower yourself, and there are ways to do that. So when I was a special ed teacher, my kids who had disabilities were, you know, bullied like there was no tomorrow, bullied by all sorts of people who, you know, called them names, used the R word, you know, just name it, they've experienced it. And they used to come back into my classroom, you know, just devastated that, you know, people were not treating them right because of their disability. And they were visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. And when they were little, I used to, you know, for pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, I would go back into the general education teacher's classroom and say, what are you doing? This should not be happening. But as they got a little older, I started to give them strategies to advocate for yourself. Okay? So part of my presentation here, I'm going to give the students here some strategies, and at the same time, I want to make sure that the parents are not silencing the kids when they are challenging the home practices, whatever they might be. It could just be as simple as, don't eat that much sugar. But you need to make sure that kids can actually engage with you in different things. So using children's books on Islam and Muslims to enhance children's critical literacy and social justice. So a social justice curriculum must strive to include the lives of all those in society, especially the marginalized and dominated. And I think that is the key. Because you feel marginalized doesn't mean you are not important. And that is very, very important for parents and kids to believe and understand. My focus with my special education teacher candidates and general education teacher candidates is to say, look, I want you to advocate for all these kids who have special education needs, but also advocate for the refugees in your classroom, for kids who are quiet, for kids who visibly might look like the rest of the kids, but at the same time they might have language issues, or parents have language issues, all of these things. So Seema and I are very conscious that we see 120 teacher candidates a year, so we feel good that we empower them to really look out for a lot of teachers. And I really feel very proud of my teachers and the way they treat the kids in their classrooms. So my focus has been looking at children's books that address Islam and Muslims, because I'm focused on getting these teachers to have curriculum in the classroom as opposed to always waiting for somebody else to come tell them something. But what we're finding is that the books on Islam and Muslims, and I'm just going to fast forward, I've been watching too much TV. I'm going to show you some books that can be part of a general education teacher's curriculum. However, I do want to caution you that right now, most of the books that are coming out on Islam and Muslims either focus on holidays and Muslim traditions, which is nice because you can use them in Muslim tradition, holiday sort of activities. But then there's also books that kind of just focus on the political climate in the Muslim world. And so, every Muslim is represented as a refugee, or, somebody that will get killed or was killed or should be killed, that kind of, and they're popular books. So I wanted to just give you a few books, and, you can also Google them. They're The Grand Mosque of Paris, a nice book if you're going to look at historically the role of Muslims, in different historical climates. In this case, it was the Second World War. So if a teacher is going to talk about the Second World War, it's important that this book is part of the curriculum too, not just on a Muslim occasion. We have books on refugees, 4 Feet, 2 Sandals, great book, but again, set in a refugee camp. You've got The Librarian of Basra, again, a wonderful story, but again, set in the context of a war and a librarian trying to save her books. You've got Listen to the Wind, about starting schools in Afghanistan, Dr. Morrison's. The Hungry Code, this author appears a lot in our international children's literature, beautiful pictures. So a couple of these books right here, oops. So a couple of these books are just good general books, like this one, The Conference of the Birds. But you can decide how you would like to use these books in your schools and classrooms. But I want to go back to something that I think our kids need to do in their classrooms and in general when you're looking at children's books, okay? This comes from Children's Literature, An Invitation to the World by Diana Mitchell. So you can Google that. I have a couple of handouts. I didn't realize the room was going to be packed because usually in my other conferences it's not. So just I have to be honest. This is great. Thank you so much. So one of the things I want to point out is that any piece of literature or a movie or a TV show that you watch with your kids, you should have them address a couple of these categories, okay? The emotional impact of the literature. How does this book or piece of writing or movie connects you to your own humanity and that of others? So there's a couple of things here, I won't read all of them. Do you care about the characters and what happens to them? Does the story linger with you, making you want to rethink or re-examine? So what I'm trying to say here is that parents and children should feel comfortable challenging their teachers when a certain piece of curriculum is presented to them and it makes you feel uncomfortable. Analyze it, analyze it from the right vocabulary. The imaginative impact of what is being presented. Is it something that sparks imagination? Is it something that makes you curious? What is original about what you're reading or seeing? Do you imagine what it would be like if you were in that situation? Very basic kind of things, but if you start to think about every piece of literature in this way or any other media, you are going to be alert in your classroom. So again, a show of hands for all the students here, okay? Your parents are dropping you off at 8 o'clock, or in some cases 5 a.m., I don't know, 7 a.m., 8 a.m., right? From that time until 3 p.m., you are in charge of your learning. They're not there, they can't be there. So if you cannot, be engaged in what is being presented, there's nothing anybody can really do for you. But I believe that you can be engaged if you are paying attention to what I'm saying, okay? There's going to be a quiz. No, just kidding. All right? Author's vision and worldview. How does the author view the world and the people in it? How are people shown? Are they good or evil? Are they inherently competitive or cooperative? You want to look at illustrations, very important, right? Even if you're in 7th, 8th grade, your social studies books have a lot of descriptions and pictures and things like that. You want to know, how are you feeling when you're looking at this kind of stuff? Is it enhancing, is the author using this to enhance your worldview? Do the illustrations make you feel comfortable or are they stereotypical? And, again, social, political considerations, which groups are represented in the books, which are left out? What information does the author assume the reader knows? What attitudes are shown towards people? I put down animals because that's kind of important for some of the stuff that we look at in terms of fables from international children's literature. What is shown as being important or good? Is the vocabulary demeaning? Okay? And so I think I'm under my time, but I wanted to just tell you that unless you as parents, teachers, and students make an extreme effort to develop your own critical thinking skills, nothing in the public school system is going to change overnight, okay? You are participating, you're paying taxes, you're doing your part because it's mandatory to get a schooling, right? So make sure you're developing critical thinking skills. Stop watching nonsense because there's nothing you can analyze with the Real Housewives, right? No, I'm not saying I've ever watched it. But I'm just saying watch things that have you feel challenged. And then you can apply some of these things I've mentioned and develop a critical understanding of the world that you're part of and the world that is also there to nurture you and in some cases demean you, right? But you have this power. Thank you.
The consensus is that we're going to go by speaker, and I think unless if it's a burning question that relates exactly to what we're talking about, you may raise your hand, and I'll leave it at the discretion of the speaker to call upon you or not. Thank you.
So I actually got one really easy question and one difficult. I'll go with the easy one. The books that I showed, I have a list of books. I didn't print them out, but you can email me and I can send you the list. So my email is swarsi@nl.edu. swarsi@nl.edu, and I can send you the books. The ones I showed are, can be used anywhere from 3rd grade up to 6th grade, depending on, your child's interest. Okay, that was the easy one. So this question is a little tough, and I like sarcasm at all times when I'm dealing with belligerent people. Not a good strategy all the time, but I think there is some ways to really engage people when they are trying to bully you. So this question is that, when things happen in the media related to terror groups that are associated with Islam, when your teachers and friends, want to ask you, why you are associated with Muslims that belong to this group. So what's your right answer, okay? I think this would be my response. I think what you should say is, are you ready to have an ongoing conversation about this topic with me, or are you trying to harass or bully me? Okay? Because if somebody is genuinely trying to have a conversation on this topic, it gives you time, it gives you, an opportunity to go talk to your parents or even address it with the teacher. But if, this is going to become a combative situation, you shouldn't engage in it. And I think we have to be very, very smart as students to put people on the spot and say, are you engaging me in a conversation, or are you going to bully me? And from a legal perspective, not that I'm a lawyer, there's way too many that I've been around, if you're feeling uncomfortable in your school organization, you have to say the right words. If you are feeling harassed in any which way, you have to use the terminology. Don't say, I feel bad because you called me, whatever. Just say, I'm feeling harassed, I'm feeling bullied, I'm finding this to be a hostile learning environment. Use the terminology so that it's documented correctly, okay? If they need help, then they contact CARE for legal advice, right? Yes, yes. I was like, oh, don't call me,
Just to clarify, so as an attorney, I've dealt with different types of situations in public schools and private schools. This all pertains to public schools. So private schools are different under the law with the rights, but that doesn't mean that you still cannot advocate, whether it's an Islamic school or Catholic school. And to emphasize, if you ever need an advocate and you don't feel comfortable or whatever, and you need assistance in talking to the school, or the school is just shutting you down and not wanting to hear it, contact an attorney. There's plenty of education advocacy groups across the country, all over the place. You just have to do your research, and you can also contact the local care office if you have one in your neighborhood. But don't shy away from something because you don't think that there's help out there. There's plenty of help, and a lot of it is pro bono or discounted services. So who's next? Dr. Imam.
So I have a few quick questions. One is, who's the best point of contact to get involved with in school as a parent? Well, you need to be in touch with many people in school. You should always get to know the teachers, plural. Everything your child learns, it has a different teacher. You should know and make yourself known to that teacher. But also visiting with principals, administrators, counselors, nurse, everybody. Get to know everyone that you can. And the other question I think deals with communication, which kind of piggybacks on that one. But this one is, how do you deal with a teacher who makes fun of your religion? It goes back to communication. It goes back to not letting it slide. I try to report things that happen to me out in this public sphere. If my work environment at school, at the university gets hostile, I go and tell someone, there's someone in my department who has read the news lately and is reflecting or deflecting it on me. So I want to let you know that my work environment became hostile last week. I didn't point fingers, I didn't make any, don't get upset, stay calm. My handout has the advice written down for you, so if you all go away with the handout, you have my contact, you can contact me about the research so we can tell the good and the bad stories, but it also goes through the main points that I made. Not getting upset's really the big one. There's another one about suggestions for presenting the Muslim holiday. On my handout, you have a QR code. How many people know what a QR code is, that funny postage stamp looking thing? That's the best thing to give to a teacher who has an iPad or a smartphone. It goes to Maha's organization, ING. That's where I point people. Because there's so much there that if a teacher wants to know and do better, and you're going to go to school and say, I have a resource for you so you know more about my child's religious holiday. Here's a resource. There's also a Ramadan video on UPF, Unity Productions for Ramadan. Very cute video, so it's more like the elementary, but any teacher could learn from it. So that's how I think you handle that one. There's some about curriculum. It's a very big job to think that ISNA, ING, Seema, Sadia, everybody could get in together and build a curriculum. But because ING has addressed world history and social studies and the political issues, even all of you can learn and begin to speak the language that's appropriate. Speaking about this is very difficult too sometimes. So all of you, go to ING's website, use the QR code on your smartphone, get a QR reader download, snap that thing, and then go on it every now and then when you have a few minutes and read the FAQs. Oh, what a resource. Read the FAQs, because that's the answer to a lot of this. I don't know if we'll ever have a combined curriculum that's well addressed. This is Ramadan Curious George. Oh, okay, that's a good one. You can pre-order It's Ramadan Curious George. So pre-order it, it's not out yet. Someone here said that we're supposed to study, when are you supposed to study major religions? And usually it's world history, so it's 6th grade or 8th grade, but another important thing, that we're from all over the country, is every state's a little different. Every state's a little different. So world history, but social studies too. Even in the 1st grade, when every single classroom is learning about the postman and the policeman, they learn about the church. You should be there making sure that besides the church and the synagogue, that somebody mentions the masjid, the mosque. That's important. Who's the person? It's not a priest, it's not a rabbi. Let them learn that it's an imam. I think that was the end of my questions.
So I agree with Maha. I will add a little bit of nuance to what she just said. So there's a perception about calling a civil rights organization in that when you call a lawyer for help, the lawyer immediately escalates it and goes public. That's not true. In the majority of our cases, over 99% of them, the case remains confidential, it's all private, and oftentimes we're also telling the family, here are the tools and resources so that you can advocate for yourself. Because sometimes when a lawyer calls the administrator at the school, everything gets fixed, right? A process begins, they know you mean business. Sometimes it does agitate unnecessarily, and it makes it worse, and we recognize that. So I'm a fan of over-reporting, but being cautious with what action you take. And if a civil rights organization, a lawyer is saying to you, like, let's go sue this school, think a few times, right? Get a few opinions before doing that. So I agree with Maha, don't escalate, don't make it hostile, but over-report rather than under-report, because a responsible lawyer, a responsible organization is going to tell you this is not the appropriate situation to be hostile in. I've had to tell that to many of our clients, and more often than not, it's the client that's upset that we're telling them not to be hostile. Just recently, we had a kid who was being bullied at school, and the family wanted the kid expelled from school, and we were like, that's not the solution, right? That's not the solution for a 14-year-old whose life you ruin when you potentially expel them from school, but it also doesn't make them any more friendly to the Muslim community to respond in that way. So, questions, really quickly. Bullying is also an issue in our community, and those that wear hijab oftentimes bully those who are not wearing it, and vice versa. I agree with you. And I think that that's one of the benefits of conventions like this, where Muslims from so many different walks of life, lawyers, non-lawyers, doctors, hijabis, non-hijabis, people from so many different ethnic backgrounds and sectarian backgrounds, get to meet each other and build community. Because so often, in the same way that we're worried about the right-wing parent who watches Fox News, their kid replicating the Islamophobia on the school ground, if we have bullying or judgmentalism in our community, absolutely it becomes a problem. Which is the second question about bullying in Islamic schools. So, I think Maha mentioned this, or someone mentioned this. Your rights are different in a public school versus a private school. And it really depends on the school and what the situation is. What we were talking about today, for the most part, was bias-based bullying. So an escalation over what is ordinary bullying, which is also very problematic, but where it's motivated by a student's protected class identity, their religion specifically. We see this happening in Islamic schools at times too. Maybe one kid is from a different madhab, or one kid is a different ethnicity. Those things happen. Your rights in those situations are different. We, of course, still recommend talk to the student, talk to the administrators, negotiate a solution. Because if you're paying lots and lots of money to send your kid to a private school, and then they don't feel safe there, you're essentially not getting the return on your dollar. How do we encourage kids to stand up for themselves? This is actually something that I forgot to mention earlier. When I was growing up, a couple of decades ago, we were encouraged to fight back. We were encouraged to stand up for ourselves. I remember we took karate classes because my dad thought it was really important that we had those skills, but also because we needed to be able to protect ourselves, right? That was something that was instilled in us, and something I still hear parents saying to their kids. Now, it's important for parents to keep in mind that in the 80s and 90s, it was okay for a kid to do this. Maybe not the best way to solve something, but it wasn't going to ruin your child's life. One of the types of cases that we hear about at CARE is where a kid feels that they should and need to protect themselves because no one else will. And they bring a bat to school. Or they bring the club that people used to lock their steering wheels up with to school, right? And they get into these physical fights. Now, more and more across the country, what we're seeing is police officers being brought onto campuses to deal with violence. And so, just for example, recently in New York, there's an entire effort being put into looking at how many police officers, NYPD officers, are on school campuses compared to how many guidance counselors are on school campuses. So when a police officer is brought onto the school campus because a kid thought that they needed to defend themselves, that kid is sometimes arrested. And 15 and above, they're risking being charged as an adult. So parents, I would strongly caution you against advising students, your kids, to defend themselves. Advise them how to protect themselves, advise them to walk away, to get help immediately. But they really should never, ever throw a punch back. And to be honest, sometimes just being in the wrong place at the wrong time can also get them arrested. So it is something that we want to be cautious of. What to do if you notice or witness bullying of a student by a teacher. A lot of times we have to tell parents and families that if a student doesn't want to take action, then it's important to respect that and figure out what they are comfortable with doing. Because if a student confides in you that they're facing harassment, and you defy that trust and take action and make it worse, they're not going to trust you again, right? So a lot of it is about the trust building process. How do we speak about bullying of Muslim students as it relates to the LGBT community, especially given all of the, I'm really simplifying this question, right? But we see that there is homophobia in our community, and as a result, we oftentimes don't know how to interact with the LGBT community, and yet there are so many opportunities for solidarity and coalition work around bullying. There is lots of room for disagreement in the Muslim community about gay marriage. And this isn't a session about that. What we can agree on, and I would think that irrespective of how one feels about gay marriage or LGBT issues or anything of that sort, we can agree that an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 30-year-old should never face physical violence or verbal harassment or anything of that sort because of who they might be attracted to. That is not what our religion teaches us. There is no disagreement among the scholars on the issue of whether or not LGBT students can or should be bullied or how we stand up with them. And so one of the places where the Muslim community has continuously found solidarity and should be present in engagement is protecting LGBT students on campuses, because no student should have to experience that. No student should ever feel so scared that they commit suicide, right? And that's the reality. And we need to recognize also that gay rights activists, particularly in schools, are ages ahead of our communities. So many of the reasons why we're having anti-bullying conversations in the Muslim community and in America more broadly is because of the hard work that those communities are doing. The last question is, I want to start wearing hijab this year, but I'm really worried about the ostracization of it. The shortest, simplest answer for that is, I think that efforts like the MINA program, the convention that runs parallel to this, that is especially for youth, is an important way to build solidarity and community with other young people who are experiencing the same thing. I don't know that we could ever promise a young person that they won't face bullying or harassment, irrespective of whether or not they're wearing a hijab. Sometimes it happens because of their name or their skin color, or because a teacher gives out a horrible assignment and students decide to replicate that on the playground. Programs like MINA, youth groups, and engagement with the community are one very critical way that I know I felt solidarity as a young person, in that I wasn't alone. Even though I was the only visible Muslim student at my public school, when I went to masjid, I met other young kids who were in Quran classes who had the same experiences that I did, so I wasn't alone. And I'm really grateful to my parents, to the masajid, and to everyone that did that hard work to ensure that part of my identity meant knowing that there are more Muslims than just me.
We are ending. Unfortunately, we've already exceeded our time limit, but obviously this is of great interest to people, so I just want to thank again our distinguished panelists who took a lot of time to prepare this very helpful information. So please see them if you have questions, and thank you again for your patience and for coming.
He the principal of Advocacy. He's the cousin of Sadia.
And for those